my nights would be better spent staring at the open sky. I don't know where lies end. Just hope it's better than what's behind.
Matt, you wanted to get into like a little Neitzsche.
A little bit of a different topic here. Yeah, I was just seriously just scrolling on social media and a quote popped up for me. I love following philosophy stuff, like people just posting philosophy quotes. I love that. And I'm not the biggest Neitzsche fan.
Sure.
But this quote really kind of stood out to me, and it's I don't have any context for it. It's from Beyond Good and Evil. I didn't go and look up the context, but I kind of did that on purpose because I kind of wanted to see what you guys thought of this and applying it to sort of I guess what we're seeing in modern day, and especially in our state right now. I can give you some examples, which I'm going to kind of run through, which is why this was connected to those. So here's the quote. This is entirely about the idea of basically becoming so... Again, we have these ideas of compassion and empathy, but what happens when we go too far and we leave those behind? We cease to be compassionate and empathetic, and we become something else. Just like if, we lack empathy, right? Now we're going the opposite direction. It's not too much empathy, it's leaving it behind. It's morphing into something else. To the point where we empathize with pure evil. Right. So here's kind of the quote here, and it'll make a little more sense. There's a point in the history of society when it becomes so pathologically soft and tender that, among other things, it sides even with those who harm it, criminals, and does this quite seriously and honestly. Punishing somehow seems unfair to it, and it is certain that imagining punishment and being supposed to punish hurts it, arouses fear in it. Is it not enough to render him undangerous? Why still punish? Punishing itself is terrible. With this question, herd morality and the morality of timidity draws its ultimate consequence. So, just to give you a little bit of background knowledge, this quote that somebody posted was tied to a Colorado bill. I believe it was Senate Bill 1073. And it was about making sure that people who sexually assault children have to serve prison time. Because right now in Colorado, over 70% of people who are sexually assault a child get off on parole. You can look that up. The numbers are true. It's absolutely insane. And by the way, that's any first offense, I should say. But the first offense counts towards any child. So if there's somebody who sexually assaults a child, then sexually assaults another child, that's considered another first offense.
Oh, interesting.
So you have people who have sexually assaulted 3 different children and are still getting probation. Yeah. Now they're put into a system, but nothing happens there. Now, the reason why this was shot down, it was shot down by the Democrats in Colorado. I don't want to get too political there, but the fact is they did. And the argument was by one of the Democrats said that these people would be treated too poorly in prison. So that's why they shouldn't have to go to prison. So again,
they're not wrong.
You see this, we're seeing people identify and empathize so wholeheartedly with people who are doing pure acts of unadulterated evil, violating a child, right? And sympathizing with them, but not the victims or future victims.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to bring that up. This idea of, is this even empathy? Is this empathy taken too far? Is this not empathy at all anymore? I think we'd agree that empathy is a good thing. But when you're focusing your empathy on people who are doing pure evil and using that to basically allow them to continue to do evil. First of all, is that justice? Are we leaving it behind? There's a lot of questions that are going through my mind, and that's kind of why I wanted to bring that up. And I think there's various ways we can go with that.
Right.
But for me, I just kind of wanted to hear from you that idea of what happens when we leave behind empathy and compassion. It becomes something else. What does it become, and why is that so dangerous?
It's interesting because I kind of, as you were rereading it, and we talked a little bit about this before in preparation for this conversation, but as you were rereading it, just a couple of thoughts that kind of popped in my head were, as you go through, let me say, sorry, let me say it this way.
It's a hard question.
Well, because here's the thing: is there is something that's really good about being able to understand people and the plight that they go through, regardless of if they are an evil person or not. Like, being able to understand the humanity and the journey that they've been on, I think that is important. Because, so for instance, one of the things you'll find with sex offenders is most of them were sexually assaulted, right? And so, like, I'm not saying that justifies it. I am saying, though, that understanding that maybe changes a little bit of how you view them, right? And so I think that there is, and I don't think it's, I think there is a point where it stops becoming empathy, right? Or empathy, maybe it is.
So maybe this will help. I was sharing this with Jamie, and I was kind of like, what happens when we start identifying? And let's put aside the sexual assault thing, and let's look at just something like robbing someone.
Sure.
Well, he's poor, and he has a lot. What's the problem if he takes a little bit from him?
Sure.
That's a lot of people's attitude.
Sure.
In fact, in California, they allowed you to steal, what was it, wasn't it less than $1,000?
Yep.
You could just, it wouldn't even be a felony. You just walk right out. You could just.
Sure. Well, and
like
we have definitely seen like crime skyrocket because of that, right?
And I mean, you encourage that behavior, right? And so I asked Jamie, I asked my wife, just kind of like, well, what do you think about this? And she said, well, it's empathy and compassion and sympathy without reason. So it is still empathy. You're feeling what someone else is feeling. Oh my gosh, that would be so bad to be put in a prison, to be treated terribly. That's what he's saying,
So
right?
it's misdirected.
It's empathy misdirected. It's without reason. You're not thinking through it. You are being compassionate, but it's compassion without reason. There has to be some sort of thought behind it. You can't just be like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad for that person. Okay, but they did something terrible. Justice is the proper and merited reward or punishment, right? You've earned it. And there's the level of proper, meaning in the right amount. Going to prison for doing something like that is proper and merited.
I've got a question. Who are the groups of people doing it?
Doing what?
If I get robbed, I'm not going to have a whole lot of empathy for the guy robbing me. I'm not going to go, oh, well, he's less fortunate than I am. Please take my car. That's barely working because I need
holds
to
a gun in your head, right? To your family.
I'm statistically speaking, the victims are not the ones who are showing this empathy.
Yep.
No. I'm not saying there's cases.
Yep.
So who are the voices speaking in empathy then in these instances? You mentioned courts.
Yeah. It tends to be,
so who else?
Like you said, I could use the word progressives.
Sure.
It's the people who view it as restorative justice, right? You're not going to fix them by putting them in prison, so let's help fix them. But they're not.
So is it anybody, is it anybody who is directly a victim from whatever the crime might be?
Typically, no.
Typically, no. Okay, we're going to stay on the bell curve on that one. So on average, no. Okay. And I'm assuming then it's typically coming from people who are not directly involved in any way with the acts being taken place. Okay, cool.
Yeah, they're removed.
Now, can you think of any ulterior motives that these people might have in sticking up for things?
Well, create chaos, right?
Okay. Like, I can think of reasons why governments would. We can do that.
Yeah, create chaos, continue to create it to where the point, again, people are desperate for an answer and they have to turn to you.
And so what about activists? They have these people who don't hold power necessarily. Like, what do they have a reason for doing such?
Well, I think yes. So I think there are two components to that. I think there is the component of they want to do something great or something that's meaningful and worthwhile, right?
Yep.
So I think that's a good and noble thing, right, in and of itself. But I think that in seeking to do something good, noble, and meaningful, they are trying to find a lever that is powerful and maybe socially acceptable, and they're looking for that lever to be able to pull on. So I would say it's a little bit of a manipulation.
So using the last two sentences, pretty much that you want with a lever to pull on with power and manipulation. Are these people that typically have power in life anywhere else?
Outside of so you're saying outside of the arena that they actually have authority, do they have power
Correct.
outside? Not typically.
No, they don't. Most of us don't. And the manipulation is usually trying to bend some sort of power into your favor, right?
Yeah.
I would argue that most of these people are not doing anything benevolent. There's no kind, or it is a veneer of them saying it's out of kindness. They're using it as a cudgel to beat over somebody's head because they now finally have a club of power that they get to wield. They've had it wielded over
their head the whole time. That's kind of what I was saying was they want to use. They're like, we're being empathetic. We're being compassionate. It's like it's without reason.
And so that's where I like that idea of saying empathy without reason. That works with the way my brain works.
You'd like that
because the term I would typically use over that more is the virtue signaling, right?
The virtue signaling. Yep.
I'm going to use a virtue as a weapon against you now because now I get to fight you with something that's deemed more powerful.
Yes,
than
and
what
I
you
get
have.
to again. It's putting yourself on the side of right verbally, but not actually within the realm philosophically.
Exactly. So I think that's the predominant reason. I could have been brainwashed by a lot of politics and a lot of YouTube. That is entirely possible.
Right.
But the logic does hold.
So
if I
would say that's consistent with what we see across social media, with what we see across media sources.
If you really want to get into kind of a rabbit hole though, look at how communist revolutions start.
Okay.
What do? So there was a law in communist Russia where you couldn't fight back against a mugger unless his knife was literally over your chest. Unless the knife was over your chest, literally go look it up.
That's super rational.
So if you go read the Gulag Archipelago, he talks about that. Alexander Solzhenitsyn talks about how the idea was they empowered criminals to create chaos. So did Mao. Mao created the red shirts, right? Sure. Caused all this chaos, and then what did he do to the red shirts? He killed them all.
Of course.
Because he brought peace. Look, guys, I fixed everything. Even though he's the one who caused it, right? But again, you create chaos. You get people to give up their freedoms and their rights for security. Then you give them that security. But what have they given up in return?
So
their freedom and their rights.
Yeah.
So to me, that I think and maybe that's too insidious. I don't know. But I'll be honest with you. Why do you think they're disarming us? Why do you think there is so many people that are so hell-bent on taking away because you think criminals are going to obey that? No. You and I will, the good law-abiding citizens will, and then we will be left defenseless, and then who do we have to turn to eventually? Or who gets eliminated?
Sure. Well, and I think that thought process, though, it probably belongs with more of the few people, right? And I'm not disagreeing that people think that way. I would say in general, though, when people are using this kind of or are embarking on this,
or they generally actually think they're helping.
Yeah, exactly right.
They genuinely think we're gonna fix it. And it's but again, it's the humanism. It's that humanists, right?
Yes.
So they believe that if I'm correct, they believe that human beings are naturally good. Correct?
Yes.
I don't understand that. I know myself and everybody else around me too well to ever think that.
Yeah, and I guess
I
the other piece of it, though, is as we progress through society, right? At some point, how do we continue to treat people better without having trying to take the deeper time to understand them, right? I would agree with you guys in that currently what we see a lot when people are using that word empathy or are using it because I think it's in the public forum when you are publicly, broadcasting, oh, we are doing this policy, or we are out here, protesting because we're empathetic. We have empathy for whoever, right? I think that's where it becomes virtue signaling and it's very manipulative. I do think, though, there are some good things about continuing to go down that path of empathy right now. I do think that logic has to rule,
yes.
and there has to be justice.
Empathy with reason is awesome,
right?
That's
a
virtue.
I look at, so for instance, mandatory minimums, right? You want to talk about like justice, right? That's essentially meriting out what is deserved under the law, right? When you have a law that says doesn't matter if this is your first offense, your 30th offense, the mandatory minimum for this crime is 30 years in prison, right? That is part of, I think, where the counter argument comes in is going, whoa, dude, like it takes away all discretion from the judges, the people who are making that decision, right? It takes away the ability for a judge to go, your situation is different, right? And hear me out on this.
I'm listening.
It takes away that ability to look at the individual situation and make appropriate judgments.
See, to me, that's definitely a different topic, because that's definitely more.
Yeah, I agree. We're getting into law, and there's a lot of debates right now too.
And now we're going from
like if that's really preventing crimes versus not, right? Like there's a lot of data that's going out right now that's showing that it doesn't actually prevent crimes by saying like, hey, murder's a life sentence, people still murder. But I think that's a very different conversation. Like that's a legalistic issue, like versus us saying like, okay, should I still have empathy? Like I can be the judge and have empathy,
sure,
and not want to give you the minimum. But if the law says I have to give you a minimum, that's a different thing.
What we were focusing on is that idea of empathy without reason, or compassion without reason. There's reason behind that, what you just expressed. So but I do think that's definitely something, because I mean, as a teacher, I definitely take things into account, when it comes to punishing students. It's not just like, or not punishing them a lot of the time.
Sure.
But kind of an interesting way to end there. There's still a lot to think about on that, because again, having compassion and trying to rehabilitate people is a noble cause.
Absolutely.
But there's also that line of, like you said, well, if you've earned a punishment and then you don't get it, what does that encourage somebody else to do? And that's what I wanted to kind of get across is when you don't follow up, when you have a crime committed and that person is not punished, what does it encourage other people to do? When you can riot and set entire cities on fire and no one gets punished,
sure,
what's going to happen the next time?
Right. It's going to be promoted,
but at the same time, it's, I do understand that that would be a totally different conversation, though, understanding those two.
Yeah. I think if you're going to have that one too, you got to also bring up like,
it's a broad topic.
It's not a one-to-one. Like, oh yeah, I am the person who's trying to show you empathy. That's fine. But you did an injustice to somebody else. They're part of the equation.
If you let them off, you've now committed injustice against the victim.
Correct. So do you have empathy for the victim? It's not an easy question to ask. I do, in a perfect world, it'd always be contextual. It'd always be taking account for all these things.
Of course.
So that's why I think that's a whole different conversation. Is how does law get how should law be written and then applied to these kind of instances?
And maybe what I would like to eventually talk about one of these times is how do we promote empathy with logic or with reason, right? Because I think that's where I think that question needs to go, right? Because the idea of like, well, we can't have too much empathy, or Mike would disagree that there's a certain amount of quantitative empathy that you can have, but you don't want to get to a spot where you are, kind of reflecting on our earlier conversation, where you are discouraging empathy, right? You're going, no, you can't be empathetic because then the injustice happens. Right?
I was going to say, like, my answer would actually be the thing we were talking about earlier. Like, if I want to encourage empathy, the first way to do that is start thinking of others. And so the thing you do is like, that person could use the door opened for them. That isn't empathy, but it is the start of the process too, right? You are starting to put yourself in their shoes by trying to figure out something they need. You don't necessarily know how they feel yet, but you're trying to look for needs. So like, and that is a small, manageable thing that most people can accomplish on a day-to-day basis and practice until they have that down. Because it is a practice, right?
Yeah.
You can't just be like, you should be more empathetic. Yeah. Okay, these people don't know what that looks like until they've been trained a lot of times. Because a lot of people, sadly, especially if you're like a lower socioeconomic level, you are growing up in an environment, in a culture where you have to look out for number one to survive.
For sure.
So getting them to train themselves to look out for others around them, even if it's just the basics of doing some small act of good for them, that's an ask. And that will take a lot of practice to get into. And then once they get that, then you can start, okay, what are things they might need in the future? And then once you can see future needs, now you can start understanding emotions from people, because now you're starting to really look into their lives and try to see how things are going to play out. Like, if I punch this person in the face, their jaw is going to get hurt. They might not have the insurance to cover the dental work. Okay, I can be more empathetic. They'll start having that process, right? And so then you can think through their emotions and have more empathy.
But that, again, that's definitely another conversation.
Yeah.
But man, we touched on a lot of things tonight. I mean, we went from celebrating Val Kilmer, rest in peace, man, and talking about some roughhousing. And yeah, it was a good conversation, I thought.
It's interesting, like just kind of reflecting everything we talked about has this interesting. I said interesting twice. Good grief. It has this unique interpersonal. It's all interpersonal.
Yes, it is.
Everything we talked about tonight has to do with how we interact with other people and promoting a positive interaction wherever we are. So, love it.
Man.
Thanks, guys.
Great conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for joining us. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have anything to say, don't forget to leave a comment. And we'll see you in the next episode of Armchair Observatory.
Journey well, guys.
When this silent, you'll be alone, far from friends in life. You'll spend your evenings getting stoned.